Good morning, Suzuki Science, grade 10s. Well, here we are in week 3, and I am looking forward to doing some more learning with you. This week is all about cells. What a coincidence. We've been doing cells last week and the week before, and even before the March break. We always have a story, right? So when we look at cells, we started with the idea that all life is made up of cells. Cells come from pre-existing cells. Cells are the smallest unit of life. That's the cell theory. Then we took a look at how cells are able to only be viewed through a microscope because they're so tiny. They're very small because if we get too large, and the surface area volume thing, as we had explored, doesn't work as well, and the cell will either die on its own toxic waste or not get enough nutrients in, like oxygen, and therefore when it gets to a certain size, it will split, will undergo mitosis, and it will produce a replicate of itself with the same DNA and whatnot, same organelles and all that kind of stuff. If the cell does not replicate properly, if there's something wrong with the genes that tell it to replicate or the genes that tell it when to stop replicating, then you might end up with a cancer. Cancers are not good. There are many, many different types of cancers, and because they are so different from one another, it's very difficult for us to treat. So, if the cancer occurs, then the cell replicates like crazy. Normally the cell will stop when there is not enough space, not enough nutrients, or when the conditions are not correct. These cells will then specialize for particular jobs, and that's where we get to now. So now, this lesson we're going to call bigger than the cell. Even though I'm still focusing on the cell, but we're going to get bigger now. And this is really the last hurrah at cells. Next week, we're going to be spending the week on developing your presentation. Many of you had worked on it already. I know that many of you had got most of it done, a good chunk of it. It's been slightly revised now, and I'll release that later this week for anyone who wants to get started on that early. And that presentation, the submission and the instructions, all that stuff will be given to you next week, and it'll be submitted next Friday. Not this upcoming Friday, but the following Friday. I don't know the date, so I can't tell you that. So this week, we're focusing on bigger than cells. The big ideas of this week are cell specialization, cells forming into tissue, tissues forming into organs, organs forming into organ systems, making up the organism, the interdependence of organ systems, and how they work with one another. That's the big idea of this lesson. Okay? In terms of what you're submitting at the end of this week, the Google Doc, like you had last week, you're going to work through it, and whatever you get done, and you submit regardless. Even if you only do one question, submit it. You'll see that the Google Doc, here I'll show you as I'm talking about this stuff here. The Google Doc will have green questions, which is the minimum. Yellow questions, which is, I call it, good complete, exemplary complete. And on this Google Doc, anything that's labeled in green or yellow, they're questions, so you answer them. As I said before, yellow, if you're just looking for the minimum, you want to be done in 3 hours, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, do the green. You'll have gaps. You won't be well prepared for grade 11 biology or grade 12 biology, so if you plan on taking those courses, then, and you want to have success, then I recommend that you do the green and the yellow, and do some more exploration. I mean, you're at home, you got lots of time. You only need to sleep 8 hours, if not even less. So I'm sure you have time to play with your family and do some growth as well for your mind here. Okay, so as you go through this document, you'll see there's also reference to Learn 360. You did one of these last week, so I have several of these. This one I didn't highlight. This one is I probably put it as a pink, meaning that it's kind of the exemplary completion, and you leave that to the very end. More green, so answer those questions. More green, so this entire table you're completing, different cell types and their functions. Even though there's only 6 cells, 6 rows, you could put more rows if necessary. Elaborate. This is the product that you're submitting at the end of the week. In addition to the Google Doc, you're also going to be participating in a mini debate. And you're going to find a partner in the class, and the two of you are going to either pick precision medicine, which I'll explain, or transgenics, which I'll explain. And you're going to debate whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. This will set you up very nicely for grade 11 biology, where we also talk about these concepts, and grade 12 biology, where we also talk about these concepts. So you're completing that mini debate. It will be in the form of text. You'll be typing it in a discussion form in D2L. You'll get in specific instructions in the Google Doc. Then you have more Learn 360 resources. You'll see that highlighted here. And you'll see sometimes I'm getting to complete the whole thing, cell specialization, whole thing. Sometimes I'm specifically saying complete pages 1 or page 2 or 1 through 5. So you can do all of it if you like, but in terms of what we're doing in grade 10, what I put there is sufficient. Okay. As I go down, you'll see there's lots of links. These links are resource links to give you more information about the concept. So there's animation and people who are very dynamic or have lots of cool equipment or something else that supports the lesson. That's what those links are about. More yellow, so answer. More yellow, you answer. Another link, click on that, find more information. Elaboration again. So I'll talk more about this, but green, you're defining the tissue definition at the minimum. But realistically, you should know the different types of tissue, and that's why that's in yellow. You should know the animal stem cell and a plant stem cell, what it's called, an organ definition, an organ system definition. You should be able to label this leaf. We talked about that in grade 11 bio, and we expect that you know that. So if you're taking that course, being able to label this leaf is good, because we're not going to be teaching that next year. Once again, it is important for you to know the organ systems. That's one of the big takeaways of this particular week. The big concept, the big idea is the organ systems and how they interplay with each other. Before you can know how they interplay with one another, you need to know what the organ systems are about. There are 3 organ systems that you should know the organs: digestive, respiratory, and circulatory. But you don't need to know the detail. A lot of books, a lot of resources are going to go into ultimate detail about all these 3 organ systems, but we actually spend a lot of time. We spend a month on those 3 systems in grade 11 biology. Your responsibility is to know those 3 systems and some of the major organs. That's what you see on this chart. Your responsibility is to know 10 systems from the animal, from the human. And so those 3, and along with these 7. And the primary function. So it's basically straight knowledge. You'll also see some interesting organ systems. They're really organs, but I put them on this table from the plant. So we're learning about plants and animals. They're both organisms that you should be familiar with. So for the leaf, the stem, and the root, what's its primary function, as well as some important, in this case, plant parts. Yellow, once again, I learned 360 on the worksheet, which is good for you to learn. Notice it says page 2 to 3, page 8, page 1 to 2. There'll be another Nearpod that you can complete as an exit out of the lesson to make sure that you actually acquire some knowledge. Then, see this part here? This is the biggest takeaway from this lesson. And that is the fact that organ systems are interdependent upon each other. What is the significance from the lesson? Here I'm going to do a drawing. I'll do this drawing while I'm teaching the lesson as well. I'll explain it, and then you should be able to explain it in your own words. And of course, you should be able to give me one other example, which there's quite a few in the lesson. Some I'll talk about, most are just there for you to peruse. At the end of this, you'll submit your Google Doc. All right, if you don't submit it and you don't complete anything, it's incomplete. So your mark will not change, and you'll be woefully unprepared for the next level of science. If you complete the green, the minimum, okay, that's good. At least you got the minimum concept. If you complete the yellow, that prepares you for next year. Okay? And then the optical medical technologies presentation. This is the presentation that you guys started before the March break. You've had time in class to work on it. Many of you worked on it during your 3 weeks. Many of you got it done. And I said I'd give you some feedback, which I will. And the final copy, the version of it, will be due a week this Friday. Okay? Some final resources here. And now at the end of this lesson, so if we were in school, we'd do a virtual dissection with our virtual dissection software in the school, which is excellent. It's really, really nice. But you do not have access to that at home. So you have to use kind of a more elementary version. I'm not a big fan, but it might get you some understanding of the internal anatomy of a frog. So you'll look through the frog, just play with it. You're going to do a sketch. You can either use Google Jamboard, which is another new software. I'll explain how to use that. Or you can use any software you have on your computer. Or you can draw it by hand and take a picture and insert it in your Word document. So that sketch, that's yellow, so it's nice to complete. And the green, you should complete for the minimum. That is labeling each of these organs in this organ system of the frog. Okay? So that is what the week entails. So today is Monday, and you will have until Friday to submit this work.